Beloved Saints, today's 5-minute message of redemptive history is about God's Covenant, Part 2, from the 4th book of Redemptive History series, God's Profound and Mysterious Providence. Last time, we examined the two distinctive characteristics of God's covenants. First, it is a sovereign covenant, and second, it is an eternal covenant. Today, at this time, let us examine two other characteristics of God's covenants and share God's grace together. Third, it is a covenant of God's oath. God's covenants are eternally effective because they are covenants of His oath. The verb to swear in Hebrew is sabah, which originally means to promise by repeating 7 times. This signifies a promise which must be kept. Therefore, an oath is a solemn declaration of the necessity of keeping a promise. If a human oath is important, then God's is all the more so. In man's case, a change of circumstance or presence of other factors can always bring about a change of the human heart. However, what God has sworn by oath will never be altered or annulled, but without fail, it will be accomplished as promised. So, covenant of God's oath remains effective through eternity. When we look in the Bible, we can see that God established His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and He swore it as an oath. When God ratified the covenant through Moses at the plains of Moab, He also did it with an oath. Also, when God made the covenant with David, it was done with an oath. That is why Psalms 132 verse 11 states, God swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. What God has faithfully sworn can never be repealed, no matter how Satan may try to interfere. His administration of redemptive history will surely be accomplished. Let us hold on to this covenant of God's oath and be victorious every day. Fourth, it is a covenant that God remembers. God has said that He will surely keep the covenants He has made with our forefathers. In Genesis 9 verse 15 it says, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. In Leviticus 26 verse 45 it says, but for their sake I will remember the covenant with their ancestors, whom I brought out of Egypt, in the sight of the nations to be their God. I am the Lord. And so, what does it mean that God will remember? First, it means that He will never forget the covenant. This is shown when God did not completely destroy the southern kingdom of Judah, but instead He allowed them to return from the Babylonian captivity, even though the kings of Judah had transgressed against Him. It is because God remembered His covenant with David. In 2 Chronicles 21 verse 7, it states, Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which He had made with David, and since He had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. Second, what does it mean that God will remember? It means that God will be merciful. Luke chapter 1 verse 72 says, to show mercy toward our fathers and to remember His holy covenant. Here, remembering the covenant and showing mercy are used synonymously. And in Luke 1 verse 71, the term salvation is also used to mean the same thing. God saved the Israelites from 430 years of slavery in Egypt because He remembered His covenant and had mercy on them. Exodus chapter 2 verses 24 to 25 says, So God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Beloved saints, the covenant of God is a sovereign covenant. It is an eternal covenant. It is a covenant of God's oath and the covenant that God remembers. However, ultimately, all covenants are God's grace. It is God's grace that established the covenants. In Isaiah 55 verse 3, the Bible says, "And I will make an everlasting covenant with you according to the faithful mercies shown to David." So today, let us humbly seek God's grace and become his covenantal people. I bless in the name of the Lord.